All right. Well, here we go, sixth grade, getting into chapter 4. And as we look at the first lesson, we have a couple parts we're going to look at in today's video. The first part says to write the percent as a fraction or mixed number in simplest form. So once again, write the percent as a fraction or mixed number in simplest form. Well, first of all, 55%. One of the things that is important to remember when it comes to percent is anytime you see percent, you need to understand that percent means per 100. So whenever we talk about percent, and that's the symbol for percent, we're talking about the number 100. Percent is always based on the number 100. So if I have 55%, I need to understand that that's 55 out of 100. And so then I look at that and I think about my rules of divisibility and I say, well, those are both divisible by 5. 55 divided by 5 is 11. 100 divided by 5 is 20. There's no other number besides 1 that can go into both 11 and 20. The answer I want is 11 over 20. You have to put your fractions in simplest form. 89%. Well, 89% is going to start with 89 over 100. I guess I did number 3 before number 2. That's okay. When I think about my multiplication tables, and as a sixth grader we should know those, we kind of realize that 89 doesn't really show up unless we're doing 89 times 1. So I can be pretty confident that 89 over 100 is in simplest form. Revert back to number 2, 70%. Well, we're going to start with 70 over 100. And thinking about our rules of divisibility, these both end in 0, which means they are both divisible by 10. 70 divided by 10 is 7. 100 divided by 10 is 10. When I think about 7 over 10, I can't think of another number other than 1 that can go into both 7 and 10. So that would be in simplest form. Moving right along. Well, here's an interesting one because we have 232%. And anytime it's going to be more than 100%, it's going to be a mixed number because 100% represents one whole part. But I have 200%. So I have 2 whole parts. So in my mixed number, my whole number is going to be 2. Then because I have 200, then I think about the 32%, and I start with 2 and 32 over 100. Well, I know when I simplify mixed numbers, my whole number doesn't change. So that 2 is just going to stay a 2. What I need to think about is the 32 over 100. Well, when I think about 32 over 100, I think they're both divisible by 4. Because I know that 4 quarters make $1, which is 100 cents. I know that 8 times 4 is 32. So when I divide these both by 4, 32 divided by 4 is 8. 100 divided by 4 is 25. When I think about 8 over 25, 1 is the only number that can go into both 8 and 25. So I can be confident that 2 and 8 over 25 is in simplest form. Moving right along, now here's one that looks a little bit different. 0.35% or 35 hundredths of a percent. This is less than 1. There's not even a number before the decimal. It's 0 and 35 hundredths percent. Well, how do I do that? Well, I can start if I want to by thinking about it as 35 hundredths over 100 since I have my percent is per 100. But we don't really like to work with decimals in fractions. So what I want to do is similar to when we divided fractions. I want to move that decimal all the way to the right, which means that number now is going to become 35. But if I move this decimal 2 places to the right, I need to move this decimal 2 places to the right. Well, you might think, well, Mr. Swack, there's no decimal in the number 100. Well, you're right, but technically there is, because remember, I can add decimal 0.00000, and it's still worth 100. So I could actually take this decimal and move it twice, just like I did this one, and fill these empty spots with zeros, which means I end up with 35 over 10,000. Now that is not in simplest form. I'm going to come up here where I have a little bit more room. 35 over 10,000. And I'm thinking, well, this ends in 5, this ends in 0, so they're both divisible by 5. Well, you're right. 35 divided by 5 is 7. And if I were to take 10,000 and divide it by 5, well, I know that 10, if I use my zeros trick, 10 divided by 5 is 2. And then these 3 extra zeros, there's no zeros in 5 to cross off. Let me write that out so you know exactly what I'm thinking about. 10,000 divided by 5. We've done this before. 10 divided by 5 is 2. There's no zeros here to cross off, so I've got 3 zeros here that can become part of my answer. And I get 7 over 2,000. And no number besides 1 can go into both 7 and 2,000. So that is in simplest form. The last one in this section, same idea, 0.2%. I can start by putting 2/10 over 100 because percent is always out of 100. But I don't want a decimal, so I'm going to move this one spot to the right. So I end up with 2. If I move this decimal, which once again is going to be there, so it still equals 100, and I move it one place, I fill in that empty space with a 0, I get 1,000. 2 is an even number. It ends in 0, so 1,000 is an even number. Both of these are divisible by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. If I come over here and take 1,000 and divide that by 2, well, 10 divided by 2 is 5. There's no zeros here to cross off. I've got 2 zeros here that need to come to my answer. I get 500. I get 1 over 500. And this 1 kind of gives it away that that's going to be in simplest form. All right, let's move right along. Now we're going to do just the opposite. We're going to write the fraction or a mixed number as a percent. So they already give us fractions and mixed numbers. We're going to turn them into percents. Okay? So when I think of 7 over 20, I like ones like this because I know that 20 can evenly go into 100 because 20 times 5 equals 100. So really all I'm doing here is making an equivalent fraction. If I do 20 times 5 is 100, I've got to do 7 times 5, which I know is 35. And 35 over 100 is 35%. Same thing with 8 over 10. I know that 8 over 10 can go into 100. Okay, because I know that 10 times 10 equals 100. Once again, I'm just making an equivalent fraction. If I did 10 times 10, I have to do 8 times 10. And I know that 8 times 10 is 80. So I end up with 80 over 100. And 80 over 100 equals 80%. Moving right along, 29 over 50. 50, I can do the same thing because 50 works very well with 100. Okay, I know that 50 times 2 equals 100. And then I would have to do 29 times 2. Sometimes, depending on the numbers, you might have to do a little scratch work. You might have to come down here and do 29 times 2. 2 times 9 is 18. Put the 8 down, carry the 1. 2 times 2 is 4, plus the 1 is 5. I get 58. I end up with 58 over 100. And I know that 58 over 100 is 58%. One more, 21 over 25. I like this one too because it ends up very easily with 100. I know that 25, a quarter, it takes 4 quarters to make $1, which is 100 cents. So I know that 25 times 4 is 100. If I'm going to make an equivalent fraction, if I'm going to do 25 times 4, I'm going to have to do 21 times 4. 21 times 4 is going to equal 84. I end up with 84 over 100. And 84 over 100 equals 84%. Now, what happens when it doesn't work real well with 100? Okay? I mean, yeah, technically you might say, well, you can do 400 divided by 4, and that makes 100, and then do 3 divided by 4. Okay, we could, but I'm going to show you what I think is the most efficient way to turn a fraction into a decimal. When you turn a fraction into a decimal, you just do the division problem. We know that a fraction is a division problem. So this is 3 divided by 400. So I'm going to take 400 and I'm going to put it into 3. Well, 400 can't go into 3, so I'm going to add a 0.0 and put my decimal straight up. Well, 400 can't go into 30, so I'm going to add another 0. I'm going to have to put a 0 there. 400 can't go into 300. All right, so I'm thinking, whoa, okay. So I'm going to put another 0 there. So I'm going to add another 0. I think, well, how many times can 400 go into 3,000? Well, I'm going to use the smaller number 4 and 30. I think 4 can go into 30 7 times. If I take 400 times 7, I know that 4 times 7 is 28, and if I add these two zeros, I get 2,800. So I'm going to go ahead with 7 minus 2,800. I think that's going to end up being 200. I can't have any left over, so I've got to add a 0. I've got to bring it down. And I get, how many times can 400 go into 2,000? Well, I know that 4 can go into 20 5 times, none left over. If I were to cross off those two zeros there, cross off those two zeros there, I would just end up with 5. 400 can go into 2,000 5 times. So I end up with 0.0075. Okay? And when I turn a decimal now, I have to turn it into a percent. So I've now taken the fraction, I've turned it into a decimal. When I turn a decimal into a percent, I essentially will multiply this number by 100, because percent is by 100. When I multiply it by 100, there's two zeros in 100. So I'm going to move that decimal 2 places to the right. 1, 2. My decimal is going to end up right there. And I end up with 0.75%. Well, here's a mixed number, 7 and 31 over 50. Well, the fact that I have 7 whole parts tells me that it's going to be 700 and something. So the only thing I'm worried about now is figuring out what this 31 over 50 is. And 50 works really well with 100, because we know, and we mentioned it before, 50 times 2 is 100. So I've got to do 31 times 2. Well, 31 times 2 is 62. So I get 62 over 100, which I know is 62%. But I also have this 7 here, which means I have 700%, which means my final answer ends up being 762%. Last one, 2 and 3 over 200. Once again, we have this 2, so we know we have 200%. We have 3 over 200. So once again, I'm looking at what I need to do here, and I'm going to end up with taking 200 into 3. 3 divided by 200. Well, I know that 200 can't go into 3, so I have to add a decimal 0 and put that up. I know that 200 can't go into 30. Since I'm after my decimal, I've got to put a 0 there. And then I'm going to add another 0. Well, I do know that 200 can go into 300 once. 1 times 200 is 200. 300 minus 200 is 100. I cannot have any left over, so I'm going to add a 0 and bring it down. And I'm going to end up having to figure out what 1,000 divided by 200 is. Well, I know that 10 divided by 2 is 5. I have 2 zeros here I would cross off. I have 2 zeros here I would cross off. So my answer would just be 5. 200 can go into 1,000 5 times, and there's none left over because 200 times 5 is 1,000. So I put my 5 up here. But then remember, I have to take my decimal and turn it into a percent by multiplying by 100. When I multiply by 100, all I'm doing is moving the decimal twice. Once, twice. So I end up with 1.5%. But we don't want to forget about our 2 here. That's 200. We have to combine that with my 1.5. So it's not 1.5%, it's 200.5%, 201, 201.5%. All right, have a good day, 6th grade. We'll talk to you later.